baby! I love my goddamn explosions. Yeah, my apologies, I'm lying. That's kind of the only scene with any action, so let's get started. Bam, 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 bam! It's Mr. Dancer and his magic mask! Bam, bam! Hi, it's Mr. Dancer and his magic mask. I'm back today with another video. This week, I'm going to be talking about The Seventh Seal by Ingmar Bergman. Wait, no, I'm not. That movie is way too indie and art house for me. Instead, let's talk about the way more mainstream film, The Fifth Seal. As I kind of leaked in my intro, this film is a war film. It takes some like philosophy and existentialism. It takes these types of questions, puts them in a meat grinder, and really fucking thrusts it. And then it spits it out on you in like the most crazy twisted way at the end. I don't actually plan on talking about exactly the themes, because honestly, the film probably doesn't really give you an answer. But of course, if you're actually interested, leave a comment below. I'll definitely love talking to you about it. So instead, here are some of the highlights for me. Many of these aspects of the film are very intermingled. I'm just separating them into categories for the sake of ease. Number 1, I love the atmosphere in this film. Number 2, let's talk about camera movement. Number 3, the pacing of this film and how it's structured. So let's get this huge war film started. So this movie starts off with a piece of meat. And that's because you're introduced to 4 different characters right away. And you basically watch about an hour per se of just these 4 characters talk. This conversation about meat is quickly interrupted when a mysterious stranger interrupts them.
Nem lehetne valamilyen gyorsabban, tisztelt uram? Még a nyakukra ad valami légóst. Szívesen csinálnám gyorsabban, de nem megy. Bocsásson meg, kedves uram. Nem akartam megbántani.
They invite him to join them, which moves the conversation into a bit of a more sophisticated conversation. As a photographer, he talks about the justification of having elite taste and how some people might actually want to debate that their taste is better. Why, yes, I also thought they were talking about me. I mean, if you don't eat salad with your hands, you're obviously not getting the superior taste of the fingernails and the taste buds linking itself together. After they talk about taste, they start talking about leaders as they are in war, and whether or not these leaders who make choices are justified in their choices. Then, they start asking the question, can someone justify convincing someone to be wrong, even if both of them are way too stubborn? One of the men bring up a question, and this question kind of becomes extended into the biggest conversation that haunts all the characters.
Azt mondanák magának, hogy meghal. De előtte jogában áll választani. Minek támadhat fel? Mit választana? Tomóceusz Katatiki akarna lenni inkább, vagy Gyugyu?
These 2 names represent 2 types of people. If you'd rather be born as a person who has a terrible life, but is morally correct, or would you prefer to be born as a person who is extremely powerful, but is morally corrupt, but doesn't even know it? As a result, people start arguing about each other's answers to this question and why this question is unfair. They end up just going home by the end.
Maga nagyon is tisztában volt vele, hogy mi pontosan tudjuk, hogy mi lenne erre az aljas kis kérdésre az igazi válasz.
The next day, the original 4 characters come back to the bar, and they're suddenly arrested and put into jail by this handsome devil. While in jail, they kind of go through this like weird sort of punishment test. And that test is basically the cover of the film. This is something I decided to intentionally not spoil you guys with, so watch the film and find out what happens. I will say this. The characters thought their initial discussion was a very hypothetical thing. Yet, things become a little more pragmatic.
Segíts meg.
Most people can tell this film has a very anxiety-inducing sort of atmosphere, but it's subtle. But not in the sort of like it's creeping way. It's kind of just there, behind you, nothing else. Kierkegaard's anxiety. In order to achieve this, I would argue this film uses a lot of very focused but minimalistic sort of directing. So for example, the beginning of the film with the huge conversation, that part really feels like a play. The camera itself kind of follows the stage direction. A lot of films don't actually do that. For example, you have a huge scene in a Marvel movie, right? And you're filming, one guy punched someone, but there's like flying cars and flying concrete and flying people and flying pickles. But in a play, you can't really do that. It's very focused on the singular action that the scriptwriter is telling you to do. For example, in this scene where you see the camera literally follow this guy.
Mosakodós kislánya, és közben vagyonokat rejteget a zsebében.
Délután kaptam egy 100-ostól ajándékba.
Divatos lett mostanában ez a darling.
So while he's not the most important thing going on the screen, it still feels like a play because he moves and the camera follows. It's a play on your attention, basically. Your attention is directed by the camera in a very limited way. It's like a play because stages are so limited, so when a scriptwriter tells an actor to do something, it is so attention drawing. Oh wait, looks like I'm talking about porn again. To me, what this does is that it sets the conversations and the drama onto a sort of stage-like performance. It focuses your attention onto the dialogue. But the film does have things that don't work like a play, that are also minimalistic in its own way. For example, the opening credits, which I love dearly. And it allows the film to dwell a little bit more into a sort of focused surrealism. These clocks, these toys, I feel like this combination really enhances this dread feeling all the characters share because of the war, because of their conversation.
Éppen elmúlhatom, ezen aztán igazán nem múljon.
I've already touched on the camera a little bit, but this really deserves its own focus. Notice how in this scene right now, the camera is following the talking heads. Instead of cutting between the dialogue of whoever's talking, the camera actually just moves and circles. It's a long, continuous take, but also moving, yet also very slow. It's dynamic, but moody. Of course, I can talk about how it helps the anxiety atmosphere, but really, this camera work is just creative, immaculately done, and just kind of gorgeous.
Ami jót, ő elgondolt a világról. Az valóra is váljon.
Now, the acting in this film is already really good, but the camera movement in this film really helps these actors. You can see their expressions, their little movements clearly. You notice them because the camera moves to their face. It practically orders you to focus on them. I really enjoyed how this sort of movement made the film move. And yet the camera does cut between takes. It almost feels like their conversation, as they also flow between different topics and seem to cut and jump into different topics. The pacing of this film can be considered pretty unique too. Basically, there are three parts. The first is the huge conversation. The second is all of them going home and reflecting. And third, the prison scene with the huge shock. All three scenes' paces are very different. The first, being very dialogue heavy, is a little slower. The second, being very montage heavy, is a little more surreal. The third, I guess you can consider the fastest, as it has the shock and a little more action. This is why the interruptions in this movie are so important. They exist right from the beginning and are pretty much the only consistent thing throughout the film. In my opinion, I think they're there to make sure you don't ever get too comfortable. The film never wants its audience to settle. They use a ton of Russian borscht. Paintings as inserts. The conversation in the beginning constantly gets interrupted by random war sirens.
Lehet, hogy egyszer valaki azt mondja ránk, hogy na, hála a jó Istennek.
Which you just watch the characters flip around their heads and gaze into nothingness half of the time. They recognize this sort of interruptions, but they never really talk about them. It's almost ghastly. The scene we're watching right now is definitely the best interruption scene in the film. While all the main characters go home, one of them goes through a drunk stupor liquor dream, and he meets all these interesting characters. After the hard realism you experience in the first part, you just don't expect a surrealist scene to pop up like this. The interruptions let the audience know that any curveballs could be coming their way. And still, you still don't expect that final end. I would love to discuss this film in more in-depth detail. So if you have any comments, please leave some for me below. There's so many themes that are so confusing, and I kind of think the film wants it to be confusing, because there probably is no real answer for the questions it poses. So if you have anything that you loved about this film, leave it in the comments below. Let me know about them. And also let me know what you think about this video. And with that, Mr. Dancer and his magic mask is going to be signing off.